Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Wernick, Rabbi Wernick, one of the rabbis at Bet Tzedek. Oh, wait a second. We're not there yet. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Wernick, Rabbi Wernick, one of the rabbis of Bet Tzedek congregation in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Welcome to Conversations Over Coffee, our weekly video cast conversation with interesting people about interesting topics taking place in our world. Certainly of concern to us as Jews in Toronto, as members of Canada, our country, but also, of course, with regard to Israel, which is the topic for today, which makes sense. Today and tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh Iyar. This week we will celebrate Yom HaZikaron, and Yom Ha'atzmaut will commemorate Israeli Memorial Day as well as celebrate Israeli Independence Day. My guest is my friend Shmuel Rosner, who's a researcher, editor, and writer based in Tel Aviv. He's a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute in Jerusalem, where he specializes in Israel-Diaspora relations, Israeli Judaism, American Jewish affairs, conversion, and other issues. If you've been paying attention to any of those issues, you have undoubtedly heard or read something that Shmuel has written. He's the author of a new book about it's called Jewsraelis, which is a tongue twister for me. But essentially, this is I want to say I think this is a very, very important book for people to read. It's based on research from the People Policy Institute about Israeli Jewish identity and their adjacent friends and communities and personalities. And I think also, and I'm going to ask you about this, Shmuel, I think also it tells us a lot about one of the reasons for the difficulty that Israel has in terms of electing a government at this moment. And that is the interplay of these different forces of Israeli identity that are basically at loggerjams and at a status quo kind of arrangement. We wanted to bring Shmuel to Bet Tzedek in person to have this conversation. So we're going to introduce it now. And when the pandemic has cleared and we're able to gather again as human beings, panim al panim, face to face, but not on Zoom, in person, we'll do that, and we'll bring you to Toronto, Shmuel. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure. I understand that you're having a conversation over coffee. With your permission, I'm going to have tea. I'm a little under the weather, so tea is the drink of choice for me right now.
Well, Beseder, B'teavon, and Rufu Hashlema. Give us, the 10,000-foot view. What's the most interesting thing that you learned from your research that is in your new book about Jew-Israelis?
Yes, the book is called Israeli-Judaism: Portrait of a Cultural Revolution, and it's an attempt to look at Israeli Jewish society from as a meeting point of two very different things. One is the ancient Jewish tradition, and one is the much more modern idea of a civil state. These two came together just 70-something years ago. We celebrate Independence Day later this week, as you mentioned. So it's a very short time since we started this very unique and brand new experiment in Jewish life. And our goal was to find what happens to the tradition and what happens to the state when these two things meet. And I'll count four basic headlines from the book. One is that we have a mainstream in Israel. In Israeli Judaism, we have a mainstream. That's the group you mentioned that we call Jewsraelis, Israeli Jews. These are people for which keeping some of the tradition and keeping some of the national, having some sort of national expression, these two things come together and merge to create a new culture, a new identity. And this new identity is something that we discuss at length throughout the book. But for example, just look at the Memorial Day that you mentioned. It's coming up on this Tuesday evening. Now, why Tuesday evening? Why do we start Memorial Day on the evening before the actual Memorial Day? That's because the founder of the state, the founders, the secular socialist members of Mapai, this was not a religious coercion. When they decided to establish civil events for the state, they looked into Jewish tradition and they decided that even the events, the Memorial Days or the holidays that we have that are created by the Israeli state are going to emulate the Jewish tradition in the sense that they start the evening before and they end on when you see 3 stars, the evening after. So both Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut begin the evening before and they end at the evening after. And again, look at Yom HaZikaron. Is this an Israeli event or a Jewish event? Well, consider the following facts. We begin it with an official ceremony at the Western Wall. We recite the Kaddish. We say the prayer El Maleh Rachamim. So this is very much an Israeli civil Memorial Day, but it's heavily, the context is heavily Jewish in so many ways that you can barely differentiate between Memorial Day and, let's say, Hanukkah. These two are one and the same.
So what I would say to you, Shmuel, about that is like, pshita, right? I mean, that's dafka, that's what it's supposed to be. If you're talking about the creation of a Jewish and a democratic state, you're the ultimate expression of that state should be that. It should be the creation of civil holidays that are framed within the cultural milieu of Judaism. So why is that surprising? That something like Yom HaZikaron would dafka be expressive of that union?
Well, if it's surprising or not, I don't know, but it's unique in some way. It's unique in Jewish history to have a state initiating a holiday that is a holiday so Jewishly contextualized. It also creates many difficulties and problems because if Memorial Day is so Jewish, what do we do with the 25% of Israelis who aren't Jewish and might still want to commemorate? Well, not all of them, because we have a conflict going on between Israel and many of the Palestinians who live here. But let's say there are many Druze soldiers or Bedouin soldiers. These aren't Jewish soldiers. They fought for the country. They are commemorated with Jewish expressions. And also the second conflict or difficulty that it creates is between Israeli Jews and Jews who live outside of Israel. Because suddenly my Jewish calendar and your Jewish calendar might not be exactly the same.
And also I would say, I want to talk about that a little bit more too, but I would add to what you said that there's also an internal conflict, not just between the Jewish citizens of the state and the non-Jewish citizens of the state, but also if part of the expression of the commemoration of Yom HaZikaron, of Israeli Memorial Day, is the recitation of Kaddish and the El Maleh Rachamim, what's the role of women in leading that when those expressions are also controlled by the state through the arms of the rabbinate, of the rabbanut? And I think that's an additional tension as well.
Of course, as soon as you create this connection between state and not even religion, cultural expressions of our culture, then you get into all kinds of turf wars over who's responsible for what.
Right. I think the simple solution to that, which of course Israel has yet to figure out, is you have multiple official expressions of the state for that, right? So like, it would be interesting to see, especially you talked about the Druze, if there was an official Yom HaZikaron format that was given the stamp of approval by the state, but yet perhaps had other elements to it. But we only have 30 minutes, so I want to I want to move on and just say that I know that for here in Canada in particular, but also from my time in the US and my knowledge of other places around the world, the Yoms, as we called it, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, which are all relatively new holidays that were created by the State of Israel. The stronger a person's Zionist relationship in the diaspora, the more likely it is for that person to mark those days, even if they're not an Israeli citizen. And that's also one of the tension points between the diaspora and Israel. Maybe you can speak about this a little bit as well, that diaspora Jewry, even of the most cultural kind, is still in some way, shape, or form tied to synagogue membership and to Jewish identity. And so the stronger one's religious identity or Jewish identity, the more likely it is for one to also have a Zionist identity. And that's different, obviously, than what happens in Israel. What are some of the things that you've uncovered, that the headlines, so to speak, from the research about Israeli identity that you think impacts the relationship between the diaspora and Israel?
So again, I'll give you an example that we discuss at length in the book, and that's the issue of Yom Kippur. What is Yom Kippur? How does one celebrate or mark Yom Kippur? Because that's another issue in which you can see the growing divide, cultural divide between Israelis and non-Israelis, Israeli Jews and non-Israeli Jews. Yom Kippur in Israel is a very unique day. It's very clear as soon as you open the door and walk out the house on Yom Kippur, you know it's Yom Kippur. Now, how do you know it's Yom Kippur? You know it's Yom Kippur
Bicycles.
because there are thousands of kids and adults riding their bicycles on empty streets in Israel, to the extent that the number of people riding bikes and the number of people going to synagogues on Yom Kippur is pretty much the same, which raises the question, okay, so which of these two practices is the one that we consider to be the highlight of Yom Kippur? Is it going to a synagogue, like most Jews did for most generations, or do we invent here in Israel something new? It's more of an environmental type of day. It's quiet because there are no cars and no buses and only kids on bicycles, and even the highways are completely empty. But this is something that you cannot do on the 401 from Toronto. You cannot do in Los Angeles. These aren't things that you can do in similar fashion where other Jews live. So you said correctly, for most Jews around the world, Judaism is still channeled mostly through the synagogue. That's the main tool that they use to channel, to reconnect with their Jewish identity. That's not the case for Israelis. Israelis do not need the synagogue. Jewishness is all around them. If they walk out the door on Yom Kippur, they see the bicycles. If they watch television a week before Shavuot, that is coming up in a few weeks, whether they want it or not, they will be fed with cheesecakes until they can no longer take another bite. It's part of the culture. You go to the supermarket, it's there. You watch TV, it's there. So for Jewish Israelis, and what we say in the book is that in Israel we have a type of Jewishness that we call effortless Judaism. It's Judaism that you can practice without much thinking about it, and the result is that very few Jewish Israelis do not practice Judaism in some sort of way. They will say that they don't. When we started the study, my colleague, university professor Camille Fuchs, who is a well-known Israeli statistician and pollster, And when we started the study, we went to Israelis and we asked them, do you practice any Judaism? And some of the secular ones would say, no, we do nothing. And then we handed them a questionnaire of 400 questions, at the end of which we discovered they don't practice anything except for 183 things that they didn't think about, because, well, they do attend the Seder, and they do light Hanukkah candles, and they do ride the bicycles on Yom Kippur, and they do eat apple and honey on Rosh Hashanah. There are so many things that they do, not because they think about them in a profound way, but because this is how we live. It's what we call life. Why do we have 98% of people who go to a Seder night? Because there's nothing else. You will literally sit alone in the dark if you don't go to the Seder on Pesach. So people go to the Seder or to a Rosh Hashanah meal, or 80% of them, 8 out of 10 Jews in Israel go to a Friday night meal with the family every Friday. So it's very different.
So we used to say, I think somewhat derogatorily in the diaspora, that Israeli was replacing Judaism. As I read your book, I don't think that's not the takeaway that I got from it. It's not that Israeli is replacing Judaism, it's that Israeli is transforming Judaism. What are the implications of that for the diaspora Israeli experience and relationship?
That's one of the challenges that we must face. I think that for many years, the idea for both Israelis and non-Israelis who care a lot about these relations, the subtext of their conversation was something like, how can you be more like us? Diaspora Jews wanted Israelis to be more like them, and Israelis more Jews elsewhere to be more like them. And
well, Israelis just wanted more Jews to make Aliyah.
Well, that's also true, and to care about Israel, etc. But I think that we have to come to the conclusion, the inevitable conclusion, that different circumstances create different cultures, and hence we are going to have to live with two somewhat different Jewish cultures. And rather than trying to make them more alike, we need to look for the common ground, or for the things that we can build on as we live our separate and somewhat different lives, and still ensure that a shared future is something that we can talk about naturally, and that we still have things that we can do together, that we can talk about, that we can agree on. But expecting Yom Kippur in Toronto to be like Yom Kippur in Tel Aviv, I don't think that's happening.
What are, the JPPI, the Jewish People Policy Institute, spends a lot of time thinking about that question. What are some of the things that come top of mind? What are the opportunities for deepening the relationship between the diaspora and Israel?
Well, look, even within the Institute, we have many debates about these issues, and not everyone agree on the same recipe to make these connections stronger. I'll give you my recipe. My recipe is to focus less on the things that we tend to focus on, which are the things that divide us. Our tendency when we have like official meetings of Jews from North America and Jews from Israel is to immediately talk about all the things we disagree on. We talk about politics and the occupation and settlements and security and reform versus Orthodox, or conservative versus Orthodox, and the Western Wall platform, all these things that immediately put us in a bind and make us, well, sometimes angry at one another and often disagree. I would much rather find a way to focus on the things on which we can agree, which are history, culture, language, Torah, good deeds and mitzvot, things that are part of our heritage and that do not put us immediately into this corner of We have our own way, you have your own way, we have our interest, you have your interest, because such conversation, again, I've been in this business almost as long as you have, and we don't make so much progress, I must say. It takes a long time to make progress when people completely disagree on, let's say, the settlements. So you have many Jews in North America who completely disagree with Israel's foreign policy. Well, Israel isn't going to alter its foreign policy because of sensitivities of Jews who live elsewhere. So why bother? You know, let's talk about the things that unite us. I know this sounds like somewhat like a motherhood and apple pie, but I think it's a real issue we need to work on. You know, when we bring together Jewish leaders, Jewish groups, we need to formulate our topics for conversation, our agenda in such way that can lead us to fruitful conversation and not to disagreements.
I just want to remind you that motherhood and apple pie is an American metaphor. In Canada, it's motherhood and maple syrup.
Oh, okay. As you might not remember, I did live both in the United States and in Canada.
And in Canada, I know, which is how you know the 401.
Exactly.
Look, you know, I as someone who's, you know, been involved with the Jewish Agency and the WZO and the Masorti conservative movement in Israel and around the world, I know how frustrating it is to talk about the things that divide us. And I certainly agree that there is much more that unites us that we can focus on to build those bridges. But at the same time, I don't think we should ignore some of the real key things that you know, perhaps we won't ever fully resolve to anyone's satisfaction, but for which it's important to continue to make progress. I can't talk to an Israeli thought leader without asking, you know, four elections in 2 years, another stalemate, a prime minister under not even under indictment, but in trial. You know, al regel echad, on one foot. What the hell's going on over there?
The short answer is that we got stuck. We have it's like a pipeline, and there is a problem with the pipeline. Something we got sucked in, and it's stuck there. And until it goes one way or the other, we can't resolve the issue. And this suck, whether you agree with him and support him or disagree with him and do not support him, this factor is Prime Minister Netanyahu. Elections in Israel in the last 2 years have been mostly about one issue, and that's whether the Prime Minister continues playing his role as the leader of Israel, something that he's been doing for 12 years, the longest serving Prime Minister in Israel's history. Netanyahu is a man with many achievements, with profound abilities, with great experience. He's an intellectual. He knows he's a very capable politician. And for those wanting to get rid of him, it proved to be a very difficult mission. He's persistent, and he wants to stay there, and he still has enough people supporting him, not to win elections, but to get to a tie. And as long as we have a tie, there is no definite conclusion. And again, we are stuck. The chances are that in the coming year, we will have our fifth election. It's a very likely, the most likely scenario to come out of the fourth election is a fifth election. It's not the only possible option, but it's a very likely option, and all other options seem quite difficult to achieve. And also, if someone is able to form a coalition and a government, it does not seem as a government that will last for very long. So maybe we won't have election in September or October. Maybe we can postpone it until December or January or of 2022. but I don't think we are expecting a long-lasting government that will come out of this last fourth election.
Do you think it's likely that Netanyahu is going to be able to form a coalition and at least have a temporary government for those 6 to 7 months?
Right now, he doesn't have it. Right now, he's stuck with a very stubborn right-wing party that would not agree to rely on the Islamist party, Ram. That's one thing. He has Naftali Bennett of Yamina, who might have an option to be himself the prime minister. And when you're handed the keys to the prime minister's office, you might not be tempted to join a coalition in which you are second or third in command, and with the prime ministers whose main goal is to make you as small as possible. So it's going to be very difficult for Netanyahu to form a coalition. Then again, also for his rivals. His rivals, there are enough seats of people who do not wish to see Netanyahu continue playing the role of prime minister, but these people come from very different parties.
I think we lost you, Shmuel. Well,
that's it will be.
So it looks like Shmuel, you froze a little bit. We lost you when you were saying that the opposition, the alternative, comes from very different parties.
Right, and very different ideologies, and to see all of them formulating a government together that could last. Naftali Bennett from Yamina, the very hawkish member of Knesset, or Gideon Sa'ar, even more hawkish than Netanyahu, to see them sitting with members of Knesset from Meretz, the radical left-wing Meretz, or from the communist Arab party, I don't know. Getting rid of Netanyahu is something that they all want very much. But there is, they all have constituency, and they must play this game of pretending to stick with the ideology. So for them to form a coalition that is so far, ideologically speaking, from their core ideology seems very difficult.
At the same time, though, the risk is that the more the elections promulgate themselves, the fewer Israelis will actually show up for the polls, because they're going to say, "What difference does it make? Nothing changes." And that can't be good for the body politic by any definition.
I agree, but if there's a fifth election, it's just you roll the dice once more, and 2 or 3 seats can alter the outcome and make someone capable of forming a coalition.
Right. Shmuel, thank you so much for being here and for sharing with us not only a little bit of the high level of the very important learning of your book. Give us the title one more time, because I read it. I think it's a must read for people that are interested in what's happening in Israeli society. So give us the title one more time.
Thank you. It's Israeli-Judaism, Portrait of a Cultural Revolution by Shmuel Rosner and Camille Fuchs. It's available on Amazon.
Right. So please, if you're interested in these topics, you should get that book. And we look forward, Shmuel, to having you here in Toronto sometime in the, God willing, not so distant future. Continued Refuah Shlema.
Thank you for having me.
We'll continue to watch your analysis in the periodicals that you write. And see what's happening in Israel at this time. We want to wish you a meaningful Yom HaZikaron and a celebratory Yom Ha'atzmaut. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.